thanks for that, guys. Soren's just ruined the title of my sermon. I was going to talk about how Christianity is always easy and life is simple, but that's okay. Not really. Just making stuff up as I go along. Great to have you with us. It's lovely to be kicking off a new ministry year with you all. And I thought the way to start was by actually giving you a soundtrack for the year. That's my idea. I don't know if anyone else does that, but whenever we go anywhere of any distance, we've got to have music and we've got to have a soundtrack set up for it. So when we went to Merimbula during the year, I took it upon myself to organise about 20 hours of music into a playlist, and the start of every journey would start with a song that I hoped would set the theme for the next stage of the journey. And that song was Baby Shark. I don't know if you know that song. Don't look it up. The kids knew when they heard Baby Shark, we were on the journey. That's part of what is driving that for this year, is not to get Baby Shark stuck into your head. Baby Shark. No. But it is to, I guess, give a sense of a soundtrack for the year, a sense of something that you can come back to as you make your journey through this year, as you make your journey around the sun. While we were away at the start of the year down at Torquay, I spent a lot of time walking, and I spent some time listening to a podcast about how Saudi Arabia came to be hosting the Soccer World Cup and how the bid process had been organised so that, surprise, surprise, they were the only ones that could bid. And while this podcast was unfolding, I kept hearing this phrase, and it kind of stuck out with me because they were talking about the philosophy of Saudi Arabia's rulers when it came to some of these things. And the phrase that kept sticking out was, move fast and break stuff. It's a phrase that's often been used in connection with Silicon Valley as well. And it's the idea that in the breaking of stuff, that destruction provides opportunity for innovation and for profit. But every time I heard it during this podcast, there was something in me that went, a little bit like fingernails going down a blackboard. You know that feeling? Do you remember that? Where kids would come in and they just go screech down the blackboard. That's what it did to me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but whenever I heard it, I would balk at it internally. And later that week, I was reading an article from November last year that talked about the spiral we seem to be stuck in as a culture, that we are moving and spinning ever faster, that we're breaking things and then looking for an advantage in that. And some of those things are really important. The author, a scholar called Tish Harrison Warren, talked about how the issues that we face can seem exhausting and insurmountable in that climate, but the things that are solid and built slowly can often endure upheaval. And it helped me, I guess, get a handle on why that phrase, move fast and break stuff, was so jarring. And it's because as a church, we're not in that business. We're not in the business of moving fast and breaking stuff. That's not the life that we're called to. We're not called to attach ourselves to power and break things to see what advantage we can get in the culture. We're called to a better way. She finished her article this way. She said, I don't know how to solve the big problems of the world. I wish I did, but I don't. But I know we can go slow and repair things in the way that we can, in the places where we dwell, in the institutions we inhabit, with the people around us. We can serve the needy and the disadvantaged in our cities and towns. We can seek faithfulness in our small local congregations. We can help form churches that are humble, accountable, and a radical alternative to the world. And I like that. I like the idea of moving slowly enough to see what God is doing, and then seeking to partner with the Spirit wherever we find him moving. I like the idea of churches being places of repair for relationships, for culture, for people. But we can't do that work if we are running in a headlong rush for the next thing. We can't do that slow work of repair if we're running along at 90 miles an hour with our hair on fire. It doesn't work. We can't do that work if we're impatient, rushing ahead, seeking the next obvious answer, the next easy answer. So this year, I guess my encouragement and my idea is that I want to make sure that we slow down enough, that we contemplate what God is doing, and we take time to notice the things and the places where God is inviting us to partner with him in that ministry of repair, that ministry of reconciliation that Paul talks about. I want to make sure that we slow down enough to invite God to work in our hearts at his rate, not the world. And I want to continue the pilgrimage that we're on together and see and hear the stories of God within us. That's part of what January was about. And I think within that context, understanding your life as a pilgrimage will be enormously helpful in finding your way, especially during a time in our world and in our nation and in the church when there's so much dissolution, when there is that tendency to get sucked into that mindset of move fast and break stuff. So that's why we're beginning a new series for the next few weeks called Songs for the Road. We're going to look at psalms that are somehow connected to the pilgrim nature of the spiritual journey that we're on. And this morning, I want to spend some time looking at Psalm 84, which is the one that Zoe read and the one we just sang about. It's a psalm that was written by the sons of Korah. Now, some of you will know who they are and some of you won't. In Numbers 16 and 17, Korah and others lead 250 men in revolt against Moses and Aaron. The purpose of the revolt was to bring about a change in leadership, move fast and break stuff. As the leaders of the opposition stood outside of their tents, the ground opened up and it consumed Korah and others, and only a few survived. Those few, though, who survived found grace by being spared and assigned to be servants in the sanctuary. And this part of the poignant meaning behind that song we just sang. The verse of praise in Psalm 84:10. Better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked. That's the history of this song. They sing from experience of how it's better to be servants in the house of the Lord rather than to be in the tents of those who oppose the Lord. That's a beautiful song, this psalm. It's worth dwelling on and sitting with. I like the opening line about even the sparrow finds a home and the swallow builds her nest and raises her young at a place near your altar. Calls to mind Jesus' words about how God's eye is on the sparrow, about how he knows us intimately, that nothing in our coming or going escapes his attention. Now, we had the psalm read, and I don't want to talk about the whole thing today because I couldn't do it justice in the time we've got. But what I want to do is pray part of it, particularly the part between the salahs. So if you read it in, I think it's the New Living, the ESV, a lot of the translations, you'll see this word come up from time to time, salah. It's a Hebrew word, and we don't know exactly what it means. Sometimes it seems to indicate a pause or an invitation to meditate or think on something that's just been said. Some people think it's a musical notation meant to introduce a musical interlude, a harp solo. So whenever I see Salah in the text, that's what my head goes to, harp solo. And then I imagine someone leaning back playing a harp solo. You don't have to, that's just the way my mind works. But between the two Salahs in Psalm 84, is what we're going to use as our text this morning. But more importantly, I want to make it a prayer. So would you bow your head with me and I'll just read it out. Lord, blessed are those whose strength is in you, whose hearts are set on pilgrimage. As they pass through the valley of Baca, they make it a place of springs. The autumn rains also cover it with pools. They go from strength to strength. till each appears before God in Zion. Hear my prayer, Lord Almighty. Listen to me, God of Jacob. Amen. Blessed are those whose strength are in you, whose hearts are set on pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is a journey with a spiritual destination. We are a travelling people. It's always been that way. We are always moving from point A to point B. And usually this movement tends to be pragmatic in nature. It's the commute to work, it's a shopping trip, it's getting the kids to school, whatever. But when that movement comes with a spiritual motivation that causes us to travel, that's when it becomes a pilgrimage. And pilgrimage has always been a practice among spiritual seekers. The ancient Hebrews were commanded to make 3 pilgrimages a year to the holy city of Jerusalem. Now, these pilgrimages took place before any kind of transport as we understand it. So if you were going to Jerusalem, you walked. And if you lived in northern Galilee, it might be a week's more's walk. And the point of the journey was not just a commute to work. It was to present yourself to God in the temple in Jerusalem, the place where heaven and earth would meet. And that's the context here for Psalm 84. It's a meditation on the pilgrim journey to Zion, that place of encounter with God. Pilgrimage is also, it wasn't just a Hebrew thing, it's also an ancient Christian practice. The early Christians wanted to visit places connected with the life of Jesus and the lives of the apostles. So very early on, we see them making pilgrimage to Bethlehem, to Galilee, to Jerusalem, to visit the places that were made holy because Jesus lived, suffered, died, and was raised from the dead there. But the thing is, pilgrimage is not just a physical journey. It's not just about picking up and going from here to there, whether that's Jerusalem or Bethlehem or the Camino de Santiago or whatever it is. These physical journeys are symbols for the far more important journey that we take, that we're all called to take, that of the heart. And this is the context again. It's a meditation on the pilgrim journey to Zion. But more than that, it's a profound reflection on the all-important journey of the heart, an inner pilgrimage towards a mature revelation of the nature of God. Blessed are those whose strength are in you, whose heart is set on pilgrimage. So maybe the question to start this morning with is your heart set on pilgrimage? If it is, the scripture says you are blessed, that there is a kind of deep, profound happiness that can flow into your life if your heart is set not on being static, not on being staid or unmovable, but on continuing the journey, on pressing on in the pilgrim's path. See, ultimately, it's not so much about the outward journey, even though that can be helpful at times. The outward journey is just symbolic of the infinitely more important pilgrimage of the heart. That's the journey where God invites us to move out of our little world that too often can be dominated by fear or greed or envy or anxiety or small thinking and tribalism and politics, and to instead embrace the big world that opens up to the reality of faith and hope, and the greatest of all of these, love. That's the journey of the heart. That's the pilgrimage that we're invited to take on when we decide to follow Jesus and embrace his way of life, when we invite him to be Lord, to be the one in charge. So are we pressing on towards Zion, to the place where we apprehend God as he truly is, as a fountain of infinite love? To do this, we must be willing to make this pilgrimage of the heart. See, ultimately, the true spiritual life is not a static state, but it's an ongoing pilgrim's journey. It's an ongoing journey of transformation. And pilgrimages, they're not easy. They require us to leave what is comfortable and familiar behind and to follow a path that we're unsure of. But the thing is, God doesn't just promise a place of rest. He promises a journey of growth and transformation. And ultimately, that's why we walk the Pilgrim's way. In verse 6, the psalmist sings, as they pass through the valley of Baca, they make it a place of springs. The autumn rains also cover it with pools. This word Baca means weeping or tears. The psalmist is playing with words in the passage because a Baca tree was a type of weeping tree. In other words, it was one that drips resin or gum-like tears, like balsam trees or mulberry trees or aspen trees, that sort of idea. Commentators actually think, they've speculated a little bit about this valley of Baca, and they have a couple of suggestions. The one that kind of works for me is they suggest it's a real place, possibly the valley of Achor, which gets a mention in Joshua 7:24. It's a place where a place of Israel's trouble. It's the place where Achan was executed for bringing guilt upon the nation. They were supposed to, when the Israelites beat this city, they were supposed to bring all the plunder and lay it before God. Achan didn't. He took a whole bunch of stuff and he buried it in his tent. And God's anger burned against the nation. Eventually, Achan was discerned to be the culprit. In the psalmist's day, pilgrims probably passed through this waterless valley on their way to Jerusalem to worship. So that's part of what they're talking here about when we go through the place of trouble, when we go through the place of tears. It's dry, it's rugged, it's a tough place to walk. But there's more to this valley than meets the eye. The valley of Achor actually also cops a mention in Hosea chapter 2, verse 14 and 15. And it's part of God talking to Israel who had gone astray. He's using this metaphor of Hosea's wife as the nation. He says, "Then I will win her back once again. I will lead her into the desert and speak tenderly to her there. I will return her vineyards to her and transform the valley of Achor into a gateway of hope." So in other words, God will take Israel back into the wilderness in an overt recreation of the Exodus. God will do this to remind the nation of his redemption of them as a nation from the land of Egypt. And in that time of love, Israel will sing with hope in the valley of Achor. The troubled valley, which was a symbol of defeat and disgrace and ruin, will become a sign of hope. So as we read this passage, as we read about as they walk through the valley of Baca, it's as we walk through this place of trouble and as we walk through this place of defeat that God meets us. And notice that the psalmist sings as they walk, not if they walk, but as they walk through the valley of weeping. That can't be avoided from time to time. When they walk through the valley of weeping, they make it a place of springs. The rain will cover it with pools. That word pools is a play on a Hebrew word for blessing. So the dry and arid place, the place of weeping, actually becomes a place of refreshment and blessing. See, this pilgrim journey towards Zion, this place of the full revelation of who God really is, it's not easy. In fact, it's never easy to stay put, to stay stuck, to stay home, to give in to spiritual lethargy. That's easy. But to decide to press on, to continue seeking God, to do as Paul said, forget what is behind, but press on to take hold of Christ for that which he took hold of me. That's hard. It's demanding. It requires that we lay down more of our life, and that's not always fun. As we go on the pilgrim journey, we will have stages where we go through the valley of Baca, the valley of tears, the valley of weeping, the valley of sorrow. How many of you know that's true about life? I'm guessing most of us. But the valley of tears is not what the journey is about. It's just part of the journey. It can feel like it's the whole thing, but it's not. The journey through the valley of tears is just part of the journey on the way to Zion. Are there any Bob Marley fans here this morning? Excellent. We've got the West Indians down the front. You all need to listen to Bob Marley more. I have a couple of Bob Marley go-to songs. The first is Redemption Songs. I love that song. But the other is No Woman, No Cry. Like most of Marley's music, it's actually quite positive in nature. And the essence of the song is don't cry. Everything will be all right. It's a song about him looking back and remembering the tough days in Trenchtown and places like that. And the refrain keeps coming through, no woman, no cry. But then towards the end of the song, there's this almost like chant that kicks up. Everything is going to be all right. Everything is going to be all right. Every little thing is going to be all right. No woman, no cry. There will come a time when you walk through the valley of weeping. But the song says that when you walk through the valley of weeping, we make it something else. It's called the valley of Baca, the valley of tears. But your tears transform this valley into something different. You change the name of the place. It becomes a spring. And eventually this place of tears becomes a doorway to hope. That's the second part of this beautiful picture. The autumn rains also cover it with pools. Some translators render this verse as the early rain cloaks it with blessing. The idea is that the grace and favour of God transform this tough, hard place into a hard place of life into a place of life and provision. The picture of pools in the desert is a picture of provision, a picture of life where we least expect it. I wonder if you can believe that. For some of us that are going through our own valley of Baca at the moment, it's important to remember God will meet you there. You haven't been abandoned. God will do this journey with you. And your tears will transform this place. And he will provide life and blessing. And eventually this tough valley, this tough place where you find yourself, will become a doorway to hope. And that's not just unique to this psalm. This is Romans 8:28 stuff. We know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. You're here because in some way you're on that journey, that pilgrim journey of love with God. You have been called according to his purpose. And that means he's going to take these things in your life and use them for good. Not fun, but good. So as you go through the valley and you keep walking, and as you keep walking, it becomes something else in your life because God is a God of transformation and God causes all things, not some things, but all things, even hard things, painful things, tearful things, to work together for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. God is at work in your life. And sometimes we lose sight of that fact. But that doesn't mean he's not at work. Walking through grief and sorrow actually creates the capacity for a deep spring of joy. The pain you feel in the moment is the drill bit boring down deep into your soul. And that hurts so badly. But eventually, though, what will happen is that it will hit reservoirs of life and joy and hope that we didn't even suspect was there. See, the reality is people that never suffer have very little capacity for great depth of joy. Those that suffer and find a way to hold on to their faith in God eventually release a spring within them, a kind of joy that surprises them because they weren't sure it was there. And that's part of this pilgrimage journey that the psalmist is calling out. That as we go through these tough places, as we go through these desert places, and they will come to us at different times in our life, that our tears transform, this place. That our relationship with this God of transformation, this God who brings life where there is no life, will provide for us. And eventually this tough valley, this valley of Baca, will become a doorway of hope. One more verse. Verse 7. They go from strength to strength till each appears before God in Zion. Every physical pilgrimage has a destination in mind. I talked about the Camino before. They start in different places, but the goal is always to wind up in the cathedral where the tradition is that the bones of John, the Apostle John, are. But we're not talking about physical destinations. We're not talking about physical pilgrimage. We're talking about a pilgrimage journey of the heart. And ultimately the journey is towards the new life that Jesus calls us to live. A life typified by the word shalom. Shalom is ultimately a place of wholeness and rightness with each other that God is moving us and creation towards. And I know sometimes it doesn't feel that way. In a move fast, break everything world, it doesn't feel like that. But this is the trajectory God has set out for creation. Shalom is a place where relationships are restored between us and God, between us and others outside the walls of the church, between us and all creation. That's the journey. And every pilgrim journey always has as its true goal an inner journey of transformation towards an outer destiny of restoration. So as you walk the pilgrim way this year, remember the bigger picture. You are not just going from point A to point B. You are not just making a journey around the sun. You're on pilgrimage, where God is working on your heart, where he is bringing you to a place where you better understand, where you more deeply understand his true nature. You're on a journey to the very heart of God himself, a journey that will transform you and teach you to love God and neighbour more completely. It's a journey that requires you to embrace the Jesus way of living, to leave behind the ways of our culture and embrace a way of living that leads to life. I found this line by a guy called Brother Curtis Armquist in an article called Life as Pilgrimage. He says, Jesus is the inspiration at the beginning, the companion along the way, and the fulfillment at the journey's end, gone ahead to prepare a dwelling place with us, or for us forever. Jesus, the Alpha and the Omega and the way. For us followers of Jesus, life on earth is not incidental, it is sacramental. Outward experiences of inward graces. Every step of the way, our quest is to learn to pray our lives, to practice the presence of God, which is the way of the pilgrim. We are pilgrims in life. And as you undertake this pilgrimage, when you find yourself in the valley of Baca, remember to keep walking with determination and courage. Because in walking, you are transforming the valley and creating a path for others to follow. Keep looking for those early signs of God creating a door of hope. Keep looking for the pools of life in the desert. Because as you journey, he journeys with you. I was thinking about what to do with this message, I guess. I don't often do application. I'd rather leave you guys to figure out what this means for your own life. But I did have a couple of questions I thought might be worthwhile, just as we start the year. Are there areas in your life where you find yourself rushing towards the next thing, searching quick, easy answers? Are there ways maybe that you can slow down to partner with God's Spirit and discern his deeper work in those areas? I guess the second question I'd ask is, how can you view these difficult or painful seasons of your life, your valley of Baca, as opportunities for transformation and growth? Are there ways you can slow down and just lift your vision a little bit? See God walking alongside you. And then maybe the third question just to think about throughout the week is, what does the concept of pilgrimage, understood as a journey of the heart towards spiritual maturity, what does that look like in your faith journey? Is your heart set on pilgrimage? Or has January just sort of got you stuck to the couch a little bit because of the cricket and the tennis and all the other sport that was on? My encouragement is, take the journey. It's worth it. It's not always easy. It's not always straightforward. It will test you. It will change you. It will transform you. But that's part of the purpose and part of the journey. And the destination at the end is worth it. An encounter with God himself. Very God. Why don't we pray, and Belinda will come up and close us. Lord, I want to thank you for your words to the disciples as part of the Great Commission, that you were with us always to the very end of the age. That while we're about the business of discipleship and making disciples and living as disciples, you go with us. And this pilgrimage journey that you have us on, this journey to Zion that you have us on, you go with us in that. You never leave us or forsake us. There's never a time when we escape your gaze. That like the good shepherd that you are, you walk before us and you lead us through these places. And that means, Lord, that as we walk through them, as we find the going tough, we know that you will provide nourishment along the way. We know that you will provide blessing on the way. And eventually these tough places become doorways to hope. And so, Lord, would you help us do the journey? Help us walk the walk. And would you do your work in us? Because the ultimate destination is worth it. Lord, hear us, meet us. Thank you. Amen.